America is one step closer to solving this ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. You can't go hiking in certain parts of Canada. It's actually banned by the government. Also fishing. That's super weird. And Mark Carney is not closer to striking a deal with Trump. In fact, he's further away than ever before. So yeah, the state of Canada is not so good. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I really want to encourage you all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. I don't say that to be annoying, despite what my wife says. I do say that because 60 or 70% of you that come back to watch are not subscribed. Maybe it's because you're not logged in on your TV or your device or whatever it is. So just do us a favor. Try to shut me up, just for the sake of trying to shut me up, and subscribe and hit that like button. Without further ado, let's get into this video. Starting off with what's going on with Russia. You have President Putin holds a meeting with Trump's envoy to discuss what's going on. Look at that. Which is interesting because Trump himself said that one day he would like to show up in Moscow to meet Putin. And I think that we are actually one step closer to that happening. And in fact, he also said he would like Putin to come to the White House to meet with him to discuss this. So President Trump says that everyone agrees the war in Ukraine should end following the U.S. meeting with President Putin. Let's take a look now at the coverage from what happened.
Today, the U.S. Special Envoy for the United States, Steve Witkoff, is back in Moscow for high-stakes talks. Witkoff's visit is happening just ahead of a deadline for Russia to agree to a ceasefire. President Trump is warning Russia could face tough new sanctions, even secondary sanctions, on countries that are still trading with Moscow if it doesn't end its offensive. This is the fifth visit to Russia for Witkoff this year. Earlier rounds of back-channel diplomacy have freed prisoners but have not brought about peace. Tom Parry is covering things from Washington. Are there any real prospects, Tom, for peace this time on this fifth visit?
Well, Heather, as you mentioned, Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, did land in Moscow today. And as you mentioned as well, this is his fifth visit to Russia in recent months. We've now seen pictures of him meeting today with Vladimir Putin. But of course, we've seen that before. And what we have not seen is any sign that Russia is interested in ending its war in Ukraine. If anything, the war has become more intense. Russia continued its attacks overnight. The UN says that June saw Ukraine suffer its highest number of monthly civilian casualties in 3 years. It says 232 people were killed, more than 1,300 injured. And the UN says in that same period, in June, Russia launched 10 times more missile and drone attacks against Ukraine than it did in June of 2024. So at this point, there's no sign Russia is looking for peace, despite these repeated attempts by the U.S. to cajole or convince them to back off. Donald Trump, of course, said he would end the war in Ukraine on day one of his second term. That didn't happen. At one point, Trump blamed Ukraine and its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, for dragging out this war. But lately, Trump has been sounding increasingly frustrated with Russia and with Vladimir Putin.
I mentioned, Tom, he's threatened harsh sanctions, secondary sanctions on countries that are still doing business with Russia. So countries like China and India that buy Russia's oil. How are Russian officials responding to Trump's threats there?
Well, we've heard Russian officials call these new proposed sanctions illegal. But of course, Russia's war against Ukraine is widely seen as illegal. But this is another of Trump's deadlines. Trump has given Russia basically until the end of this week to agree to a ceasefire or face these new sanctions. Now, there's very little trade between the U.S. and Russia, so direct economic sanctions against Moscow wouldn't have that much effect. But as you mentioned, Trump is threatening secondary sanctions against countries that do business with Russia, including buying its oil. So natural resources are the backbone of the Russian economy, and countries like China, like India, like Turkey, they're continuing to buy those natural resources. So those countries could face steep U.S. tariffs if they continue to do business with Russia. Now, Trump.
My personal opinion on this matter is I think you're going to see a business deal that's just going to catch people from surprise of Trump doing something directly with Russia. What am I basing that off of? Just the fact that Trump in the past has said that Russia is a good customer, despite the war stuff, right? Despite them being these bad guys, America has business with China, like a lot of business, and they're also known as the bad guys, not necessarily in direct war with anybody right now, but a customer is a customer. And so I think you're going to see something happen in the next couple of years. That's my prediction. I do hope we find peace sooner than later, but I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. Now we got to hyper focus on what's going on in Canada, because it's getting a little bit weird. The BC NDP and the Manitoba NDP, which is what both of the premiers of the respective provinces are, both sat down together and talked about trade deal.
Hey, man.
Hey, Dave.
Let's free some trade.
Yeah, let's knock down some barriers. Well, this will be good for jobs, good for the Canadian economy. Yeah.
What's this piece about Whistler becoming a part of Manitoba?
No, that's, some creative approaches here.
It's important for us in our leadership to make sure our people are looked after and we're growing the economy and knocking down internal trade barriers so our goods can flow back and forth while making sure there's a process to ensure workers are protected. Really important for us in British Columbia, and I'm really honored that Premier Canoe was willing to enter into this agreement with us.
BC and Manitoba taking the lead.
Here we are. This is a
oh, wow.
work jersey. Now, he's Canadian. He's not part of the deal.
Okay, I was going to say.
I know you're a CFL fan, and
definitely am.
And try on the Lions for size, man. Hey, man.
So this is interesting. One, because the BC NDP has made their profile on X to be the Pride logo, even though Pride Month was June or whatever the hell. I don't know. We're making things up as we go nowadays. But when you take a look at the pipeline, which is supposed to be this Canadian economic powerhouse, right? A pipeline from the west coast of Canada to the east coast of Canada to the northern to the southern parts of Canada, where we can basically just stop relying on America. We can transfer within our own region, our own oil, which would be huge. The only two provinces that haven't jumped on board is so happens to be those two guys that we just saw on camera, which also so happens to be the NDP, which is insane because as we've seen time and time and time again, the biggest cockroaches in this country are the NDP. Provincial, municipal, federal level, it doesn't really matter. Their mentality of going about things is just always to screw over Canadians, to block things, and to push their own personal agendas. But that's my opinion. I'd love to know what you guys think. Then we got to take a look at how Manitoba is insanely on fire. Like quite literally insanely on fire. And when you zoom in on certain places like Leaf Rapids, there are just fires in and around and surrounding the town of Leaf Rapids, which is crazy. And then on top of all that craziness, we got to take a look at this viral clip that's circulating in Canada. The Nova Scotia Premier, Tim Houston, announces that citizens are now banned from entering the woods, including hiking, to prevent wildfires. And I know what you must be thinking, that that's got to be taken out of context. There's no way a Canadian official is actually going to ban and forbid people from going into the woods. But yeah, he actually is.
Effective 4 p.m. today, we're telling Nova Scotians, stay out of the woods. We are restricting travel and activities that really aren't necessary for most of us. Hiking, camping, fishing, and the use of vehicles in the woods are not permitted.
Hiking, camping, fishing, and the use of vehicles in the woods are not permitted. This is weird. I get that you're trying to prevent the spread of wildfires caused by humans, right? Either through dried up dirt and oil and shit like that, staying on the back of vehicles and back of motorcycles, or campers that are out having fires and they don't put their fires out. Like, yeah, of course that's a problem. But to try and actually to forbid people as of 4 o'clock yesterday to go into the woods is weird. This is like some COVID stuff, man. This is weird.
Trail systems through woods are off limits. Camping is allowed, but only in official campgrounds. The fine for violating any of these bans is the same as the fine for the ban on burning, $25,000. And if
as someone who used to live in a van, I would park on crown land, and I could camp there for up to like 14 days without moving. You are not allowed to do that now, according to the Nova Scotia Premier. So if you are living in your van, you can literally only go to registered campsites. You have to pay. So that's kind of interesting. I wonder how they're going to find the homeless population, though, because yeah, homeless people do obviously live in downtown cores, city centers, and stuff like that. But there's also a lot of homeless people that live in the woods, like not just van life people, but actual like homeless people, right? Are they going to be fined $25,000? Are they going to be forcibly removed from the woods? Like, how are you even going to get away with this? How is this going to be held up in court, issuing $25,000 fines for just, what if you didn't see this? What if you don't even have a phone or social media, which I know sounds crazy in 2025, but it does exist. What if there's like a Deborah or Susan, like 65-year-old Catherine walking through the woods or deciding to go camping with her grandchildren, right? I know it's like a very niche instance that I'm giving right now, or circumstance, but what are you going to fine her and her family 25 grand? Like, what? This is crazy, man. Canada is not, it is not boring. Canada is insanely insane. I'm actually a little speechless.
If you're a smoker, for God's sakes, be mindful of where you're butting your butt out. If you don't, and you cause a fire, we will hold you accountable. So what does this mean if you have a home or cottage surrounded by a wooded area? We strongly encourage you to stay out of those woods, regardless of where they are. Please don't do anything that could unnecessarily put you, your family, or your neighbors at risk.
So if you live off grid down a big wooded area and you're just minding your own business, driving your car maybe from where you live off grid to back to the grid, back to civilization, apparently you can be fined for that. I don't see how this is fully going to be enforced, or again, it could easily be challenged, in my opinion, in court, and it just wouldn't work in the favor of the province, in my opinion.
Situation sucks. Summer is one of the best times in Nova Scotia, and we all look forward to getting outdoors and enjoying our scenic beauty that surrounds us. I get that, and I'm right there with you as Nova Scotians. But you can still go to the beach. In fact, that's a great place to be on these hot, dry days. Just no bonfires. If there's a short trail to get from point A to point B, like from the parking to the beach or to the lake to fish, that's fine. But that's it. No heading into the woods to spend time there. I know it's inconvenient. I know it's the height of summer vacation and people want to do all the activities that we so much enjoy in our great outdoors. We have a beautiful province. I know everybody wants to enjoy it, but we have to stay out of the woods. It's a small price to pay right now to avoid the kind of devastation that we saw from the wildfires in 2023.
I get what he's trying to do. I get it. I truly do. Like, hey, there's a provincial and, to be honest, a national problem right now with wildfires. A lot of them are human cause, whether it's intentional or whether it's by accident. It's still there, right? Natural occurring fires, sure. Human caused, yes, huge problem. That's why he's trying to stop this from happening. I get it, but instead of the governments, provincial, municipal, federal, working together to increase our resources, we are sending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in food and aid to Gaza, when maybe instead of doing that, we could, I don't know, off the top of my head, at the risk of sounding like a bit of an extremist, I think maybe we could put more money into our own resources to maybe combat some of these issues, like, hey, water bombers, maybe, have more people on call to, like, firefighters to tackle these issues. I know it sounds a little extreme, but instead of putting the burden on people, which I get in a crisis, that kind of makes sense to do. Like, hey guys, now's the time where we kind of have to work together to mitigate some of this stuff. I'm on board with that usually, but our government has just, not been reinvesting in itself. Our population is growing. So we got more people, more problems, more crime, more fires, more chaos that not just could happen, but is happening. And our government is, instead of spending all that extra money that we should be getting off of taxes and stuff like that into reinvesting itself, increasing infrastructure and, putting up preventative measures, we're giving that money to other countries. So it's just weird all around. And I'd like to pass a question off to you. How do you feel about this? Are you personally affected by this? Are you in Nova Scotia or planning to go to Nova Scotia? Maybe you were going to go camping or fishing and all of a sudden you're like, what the heck am I going to do? Let me know down below in the comments. And then since I did talk about Gaza and Palestine, we got to take a look at what's going on, because Canada's Islamophobia Research Hub wants the Canadian government to recognize and preserve Palestine's culture in Canada, while Palestinians try to erase Canadian culture. In reality, under the new Canadian foreign interference laws, every Palestinian protester and member of the Islamophobia Institute should be arrested and given life sentences for operating at the behest of a foreign state within Canadian borders, says Wiretap Media on X. Let's just have a little look-see-poo at this.
Yeah, I think the affirmation of Palestinian identity and culture is a critical component, I think, of addressing the issues that are raised in the report. A lot of the people we spoke with identified it as one of the key ways of just ensuring that Palestinian identity and culture and history is not only affirmed, but also to work against the erasure of these experiences. So absolutely, I think these are important things for Canada to take very seriously. Really important for the Canadian government to do it in consultation, robust consultation with Palestinians in Canada. And I think it would be a first and an important step for Canada.
I never would have thought to merge these two clips together to show how crazy and absurd all of this is. So good job on Wiretap Media for doing that. Then we got to take a look at what's going on with Alberta separation, because it just got way more freaking interesting. In a podcast clip that took place, I believe yesterday, Clyde Do Something and, the convoy lawyer Keith sat down and discussed what it looks like for Alberta to leave Canada and how, even if the federal government tries to stop it, it's still in motion.
Will Alberta become landlocked? Well, we're landlocked right now. And the difference is we got no negotiating pressure or power, no leverage, right? Because under our constitution, so if the BC government says no pipeline to Tidewater, we can't say right now, an independent country could say, and I checked this statistic, 80% of the containers traffic from Asia that are unloaded in the ports in British Columbia, primarily the Port of Vancouver, go by rail through Alberta to points east, primarily Ontario and Quebec. That's what supplies. I've joked with some of my Ontario friends, and when they talk about landlocked, I say, if we separate, you will become landlocked in Ontario, at least in terms of the supplies that go to your Canadian Tire and your Walmart stores. How are you going to go, shopping for your stuff on Saturdays when we can hold it up at our border? In other words, if BC can block us to getting to a port or to Tidewater, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be provocative, but then we can block them. And similarly, if things get really stupid, we supply through the Trans Mountain Pipeline the oil that not only gets exported, but it goes to the Burnaby refinery. And how many days is it going to be if we shut off the taps before they're going to be out of fuel? Now, I'm not advocating that, but is that any more of a harsh position to take for the country of Alberta than it is for the British Columbia government to say, no matter what, you're not getting a pipeline through our province? Okay, well then fine, it goes two ways. If you're going to control your territory to cause us economic harm and deprive us of economic opportunities, we can control our territory to do the same to you.
Interesting talking points, man. Holy smokes. I encourage you guys to go over to Clyde's channel and take a look at that full interview that took place on a recent live stream. And it actually gets crazier one step further than that, because if and when the referendum is successful, and let's say the referendum goes on the ballot in Alberta, and there's 55% of people that have voted in Alberta saying, yeah, we want the referendum. 55% would mean that, hey, yeah, no, that means that you get to now separate, right? Now there's negotiations and all that stuff, but it would basically give the unstoppable green light. Sort of. Mark Carney can technically say, well, even though you got 55%, I just off the top of my head needed you guys to get 60%. So I don't actually recognize you guys as now your own independent Republic of Alberta. Now, if this sounds kind of familiar, that's because it actually is familiar. This is what happened with Taiwan and China. Taiwan voted to separate, and China's going, yeah, no, you're still a part of China. And Taiwan's like, yeah, no, we're not. Now, if you notice, a lot of the world recognizes Taiwan as its own country. China refuses that, so China's allies will always refer to Taiwan as, you know, a part of China, not its own independent country. So that same thing can happen with Alberta, right? And that was discussed, I believe, on that podcast between Clyde and Keith Wilson, where if Alberta, if and when, goes through the referendum and it is successful with a majority, Trump, if Carney says we don't recognize you as your own independent country, there's no freaking way you're leaving, Trump can say the independent country, the Republic of Alberta, and the rest of the world would basically have to start to recognize Alberta as its own country, even if the Canadian federal government chooses not to. So we would have a very identical situation to China and Taiwan. And that is just freaking mind blowing. So I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. The sentiment for the referendum and the separation process is growing more every single day. Albertans are more proud to be Albertans than they are Canadian. And there isn't a singular other or collectively another province that's like, yeah, we're super proud to be British Columbians or Ontarians, more so than being Canadian. Like, that's just not a thing. Like, that sentiment exists mostly and kind of only really in Alberta, also Quebec, but rightfully so in Alberta, since it does provide a metric shit ton of money to the rest of the country. But moving on from Alberta, we're now going to talk about what's going on with Canada and America, because Canada's trade deficit widened to $5.9 billion in June, the second highest on record. Canada's merchandise trade deficit widened in June to $5.9 billion as imports grew faster than exports due to a one-time high-value oil equipment import, data showed on Tuesday. The deficit observed in June is the second highest on record after the deficit dipped to its largest in history in April to $7.6 billion. Analysts polled by Reuters had predicted the trade deficit to widen to $6.3 billion in June from a downward revised $5.5 billion in May. So things are not looking that good for Canada. And you would think that you would have like an actual opposition to what's going on with the federal government's approach to the tariffs, right? So far, the liberals are like, hey, we need to stand up to Trump, and other liberals around the country, liberal supporters, liberal premiers, liberal municipalities have all come together collectively and say, we need to stand up to Trump. But so has the NDP. NDP and liberals, there's a lot of similarities. But it's not just them. You know, you also have the federal conservatives, even though they're not in power, they're opposition. They've been saying a lot of the similar talking points. But when we take a look at conservatives that are in power, such as Ontario, which I know what you're thinking. He's not a real conservative, and you would not be wrong to say that. Doug Ford is truly not a conservative. And here is more proof. He is literally pumping smoke up Carney's butt saying, we should never roll over and be weak. We need to continue, and we need to follow Mark Carney's lead on this, and we need to 100% triple down, quadruple down, 10x down, and right to the very end fight with not his blood, sweat, and tears, because he's untouchable, but our blood, sweat, and tears, or specifically our money. Let's take a look at what he has to say.
Details we've been communicating, which is most important. I think the Prime Minister is doing everything in his power to get a fair trade deal with the U.S. Donald Dominic LeBlanc, which I've always said is an absolute champion. He's been down there working with the U.S. administration, working hard, again, making sure that we get a fair trade deal. And then Secretary Lutnick had a good conversation yesterday with him. And it was positive. It was positive. But it's very clear, there's two countries in the world that have tariffs on the United States. One is China, that want to economically and militarily, eventually, annihilate the U.S. economically, not militarily, but economically. And then there's Canada. That's been a member of the family for 200 years that have fought shoulder to shoulder with the United States, that their number one trading partner in the entire world, bar none, is Canada. We do $359 billion a year of products that we buy, not two-way trade, just the products we buy, $359 billion. To put it in perspective, that's more than Japan, China, Korea, UK, and France combined. So you have to respect your largest customer. U.S. is our largest customer. We respect them, but it has to go both.
No, we don't. Well, I mean, I do. I like to think that I do. I absolutely love and respect America. But Doug Ford does not, nor does Mark Carney, nor does BC Premier David Eby, who's like a depressed Woody from Toy Story, nor do really a lot, or in fact, most of our politicians in Canada. Because the retaliation response has been, let's rip all the American liquor from like Republican states or whatever off of our shelves. Let's boycott American products. That's literally what our politicians have been saying. And Doug Ford took it a step further, which is why he got called by some person out there who shall remain nameless, the fat pig with rabies. I don't know. I heard that somewhere. It's pretty funny. I'd like to repeat it. I'm just being cute and cheeky about it. It was me. I'm the one who called him the fat pig with rabies.
Ways. You can't have tariffs on one side and not the other. I still stand by what I say. Dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. They understand strength, not weakness, and we should never, ever roll over and be weak.
Okay, we know that there's a cabinet meeting this morning. There's a first minister's meeting virtually with the prime minister today. I expect you'll be talking about this approach because right now you and Prime Minister Carney aren't on the same page when it comes to hitting back. In fact, he said, we're only going to hit back if it minimizes the impact on Canada, and he's suggested he'll potentially be removing further tariffs, or we know that Canada has removed tariffs. So how is the public supposed to know which approach works, and is Canada taking the right approach?
Well, the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. He's at the table. Ontario is the largest jurisdiction in Canada, and we're the third largest trading partner in the world if Ontario is a standalone country. So, and I never recommend that. But I have to stand up for what I believe that's going to help Ontario. We have to stimulate the economy. And there's many tools to stimulate the economy, but I've been very vocal on this with the federal government, with people in public. First of all, you have to lower taxes. You have to this is economics 101, folks. You got to put money into people's pockets and not get taxed to the highest rate of 54% is absolutely ridiculous. We have to reduce our taxes, the federal government, municipalities, and then you stimulate the economy. You put money back into companies' pockets, and by the way, we reduce the cost of doing business.
We have to reduce taxes, so he admits that, but also he's 100% on board with fighting back and tariffing America, which is a cost that you and I pay. So reduce taxes, but he wants Canadians to pay more for stuff. It's a bizarro world. Unless I'm missing something, this guy is full of shit and double talk and hypocrisy, which is probably why he's so engorged. It doesn't make any sense. Doug Ford is just a freaking whack job, man.
By $11 billion each and every year. It was 8. Now it's jumped up to $11 billion. And what companies do? They reinvest it into their people, into technology, into infrastructure, into new equipment, and create more jobs. Folks, when we came into office, the budget was $150 billion. We've seen, and never raised a tax, and I never will. We've seen $70 billion of growth here and investment because we've created the environment and conditions for companies to come here and invest. We have to be competitive against the rest of the world.
He talks about being competitive and investing properly. He just had a $100 million deal for Starlink for government in Ontario. And he canceled it because Elon Musk bad, because Elon Musk worked with Trump and Trump bad. Obviously, that's his view. So he paid a cancellation fee, which I don't know if you've ever worked in contract world. Like I genuinely don't know. But cancellation fees, from my kind of limited understanding, can vary from 5% on like the never really happening low end to 20 or 25% to the more realistic. So even if we just chalk it up to a 10% cancellation fee for a contract, he paid Elon Musk or Starlink, right, $10 million because he didn't want to pay $100 million for a service that is better than any other service that you could possibly get, especially a Canadian service. Starlink is undeniably the best remote way to have internet access on a boat, on land, while moving, anywhere, at all times. Starlink. And so he paid $10 million in order to avoid paying $100 million for a very good and reasonable contract. This guy is full of shit. That's a 10%, which is probably not what the cancellation fee was. It was probably significantly higher. Maybe somebody down in the comments who has a little bit more experience with that stuff, contractor, can actually explain what a proper cancellation fee is. Maybe I'm off base, but from my understanding, 10% is like the minimum low end.
The foreign direct investment numbers came out about 2 weeks ago in 2024, and we're doing well back in 2024, and we're going to continue doing it. So we had 409 international companies invest in Ontario. They invested $39.87 billion, so $40 billion, and created 25,000 jobs. And when I spoke to Vic Fedeli, my minister, he said the pipeline is full of companies coming here. That's not including the companies that are investing here in Ontario and expanding and hiring, but we have to create those conditions. We have to get the governor of the Bank of Canada to lower those damn interest rates from 2.75, knock them down, build confidence. Let's work together on getting rid of the HST on home buyers, and not just first ones. Let's stimulate the market, and we'll.
Hold on. Are you saying that we should do things that Pierre Poilievre literally campaigned on, but you refused to endorse him, which probably would have helped him win more seats in Ontario? And so now you're choosing to literally be buddies, like fireplace, roasted marshmallows in your chocolate milk, PJ wearing, storytelling BFFs. Let's look at each other's freaking diaries type of best friends with Mark Carney. You could have had all of these things that you're saying. This guy's literally reading off a teleprompter what Pierre Poilievre's campaign is. Well, this is what we should be doing. Cutting these taxes, cutting HST and JST on new home build. Bro, Pierre campaigned on that. Why didn't you just endorse that if that's what you want?
Follow suit if the federal government does that. And for the municipalities, get rid of some of these DCs. I always say half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. And thank you, Mayor Del Duca, for doing that. And I know other mayors are doing it as well. It can't just be two levels of government, the third level saying, no, we aren't doing anything. It's a joint effort of stimulating the economy. The stress test. A lot of young people can't meet the stress test. I understand, and I agree with the stress test, but knock it down a little bit until young people can afford homes. Those are just 4 or 5 things that would stimulate the economy. Like, this is economics 101. It's a no-brainer. So we need to get it done. Sorry for going off, but these are simple things that would get our economy moving.
The only thing you're going off on is the Olive Garden buffet, buddy. Oh my freaking goodness. This guy is literally reading Poilievre's costed platform saying these are the things that we should be doing. And you fucking endorsed a guy who has the opposite approach, and now you're gaslighting everybody. Who the hell? I understand that people in Ontario feel probably stuck between a rock and a hard place, because who else do you vote for? Like, I don't really know who his candidates or opponents rather are in Ontario, but man, Doug Ford is truly a piece of garbage liar, just gaslighting people and helping to ruin this country. Oh my goodness. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes this overly emotional video. I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. Like and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.